moving forever. I haven't seen anything like it here. Because it's solid. It's solid. And I just, I carry it, I took it on the airplane. I ended up using shoving it, but, it's on the airplane.
So I'm going to go ahead and get us started.
Okay.
Sort of. So the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
I'll use the prayer that Nadine used, but is also the one we've been using here. Oh God, send us this day to do the work you have given us to do, to love and serve you with gladness, singleness of heart. Amen.
Amen.
So today, I'm going to be, Nadine is in North Carolina at a conference. And so I'm going to be jumping back and forth between the computer and sort of the circle. I guess I'll start with the introduction to this section, which is not, I didn't write it down. I've got it here. You can follow along with me if you want on the screen. We are wounded from childhood. We bear burdens from illnesses and addictions, betrayal and abuse, accidents and bullying, people telling us we aren't enough for completely arbitrary reasons. People use and exploit us, treat us carelessly and cruelly, hurt our bodies and our feelings. No one on earth is immune. In part 4, Christopher talks about Christ's wounds and how he brought them with him into his resurrected interactions with the disciples. His perfection would not have been as convincing to his disciples as his wounds were. His wounds were part of what made him who he was. People accepted that he had somehow brought his wounds into a renewed existence. Whatever new life this resurrected Christ experienced, his wounds were part of it. Our own wounds do not stop us from moving toward God. Jesus brought the worst that humanity can deal out of him, and they became part of his renewal. In this part of the curriculum, Christopher suggests ways in which we might do the same. So we're just going to go ahead and start with
So, for example, when we are looking at each human face, it's a practice that involves the eyes. When we are reading, work is a practice that's happening between our ears and our minds. This practice is a practice that involves our mouth. The gentle practice is to discover your own angelic smile, and from time to time through the week, not too often, from time to time through the week, to smile at that smile in secret. The smile has both a literary source and a sculptural source. The literary source is from Dante's Divine Comedy. Now, Dante is very precise in his use of words and language. It's almost like mathematics. He counts the number of times he uses different words to cause different emphasis. The word smile is never in the Inferno in hell, rarely in the Purgatorio. But the word smile is used repeatedly in the Paradiso. When Dante is going from sphere to sphere up in the heavenly spheres, he keeps encountering saints who, when they see him, they smile. And when they look at each other, they smile. And Beatrice, who is guiding him through the celestial spheres, smiles. The Virgin Mary smiles. So it's a sign of deep joy to smile. But what does that smile look like? I first learned what an angelic smile by seeing the smiling angel of Rheims technique. We recommend you Google image the smiling angel of Rheims technique, and if you don't know it, look at it. How I learned my angelic smile was to smile back at that angel. Another place looking to see to discover perhaps what your angelic smile might look like, is to look up archaic smiles. Archaic smiles were smiles that were put on sculptures in Greece between about the years 600 and 550. It was a major innovation. Sculptures had never looked so human as these early sculptures, but they all had the exact same smile. Nobody knows exactly why. One theory is that the people who were commissioning these sculptures were all wealthy and popular, and the fact that they were smiling just represented that they were feeling pretty good about themselves. There's another theory that I think is very interesting. In Greece at the time, and in fact for centuries afterwards, there were the Eleusinian mysteries. And these took place 13 miles east of Athens, and we still don't know exactly what happened there. We do know that it had to do with Persephone and Demeter, so it had to do with changing of the seasons, and so the cycle of birth and death and rebirth. What exactly happened there, we don't know. What we do know is that, unlike the city of Athens, where you had to be male and property owners and citizens, anybody in Athens could go there. When people would go there on a regular basis and experience these mysteries, the writer of Seneca, some centuries later, after the archaic sculpture, wrote, the mysteries are not something that can be owned and taught. They are not something that can be applied like a formula. They are a place that offers some further thing each time people return. I wonder if people were wearing something like an archaic smile from that 13-mile walk back to Athens after having been with the mysteries. The important thing here is to make sure that your smile is secret. One of the first times I taught this, I forgot to mention the secret part, and I was interrupted by a young woman who said, be careful, the idea of instructing people to smile is a very gendered thing. When you tell women to do that, it means something very specific. And I said, no, this is a secret smile. It's just for you, it's just for God. Now, it's not the case when I smile, my secret angelic smile, that I remember paradise and heaven, and so I smile. It goes the other way around. I remember a smile, and in the act of smiling, it shifts my thoughts and my feelings, such that I remember heaven once again, and remember that that's the place where my heart wants to go. In the next talk, I'm going to explore 3 words associated with the angelic smile. Beauty, gratitude, and the word you may not be familiar with is sinning.
So I thought, since you suggested it, that I would pull up there is the smiling angel of rings.
Looks mischievous.
Yeah, you wouldn't know too soon.
So, okay, so what do you think about that smile in terms of what he was talking about?
I think she's smiling into kind of going like this. I mean, rather than
Not me.
going out, it's sort of like there's something going on inside, and she's smiling. Inside, though we see it outside, but it's like a private joke. Except maybe it's not a joke. Or maybe. Yeah.
The rest of you
I often think you can smile inside, and sometimes it just doesn't come out. You just have a moment of joy or something, and somebody might look at you and say, "Oh, you're smiling. That would be nice."
I see it as reflective. When anybody smiles, I always smile back. Deacon Nadine always smiles. Whenever you go up there, she always, "Hi, Mike, how you doing?" You go, "I'm fine, how are you?" Just that ability to create that from you. When you could be having family issues or money issues or whatever, she takes you out of that low point. Just says, it's okay to feel good about yourself. That's the strength of a smile.
Where's the archaic smile? What do you think about that one? In general and or in light of the angelic smile? Are they the same smile? So what's the difference? Bev, you were shaking your head saying.
Well, this one looks more forced, like I have to make a pleasant face smile.
I think the difference is the eyes,
Oh, yes, definitely.
because I can, she's smiling, that one's smiling and thinking in her eyes. This is a smile that's the whole face, it's not just lips. The other one looks like, tell the woman to smile.
I think all of us are talking about smiles that are meant to communicate something. And I don't think that's what he's talking about. These are smiles that are seen, are not even seen. I mean, these are smiles indicating an interior happiness, which isn't necessarily something you share.
So how would you respond to either of these smiles? Should you see it on somebody?
Well, I think the archaic smile is more of that. Those were almost always funerary statues that were bought to mark a grave. And so this smile, I would say, would be something not meant to communicate happiness to anybody except the person themselves.
Isn't the smile manifesting humanity, and the angels are manifesting divinity? The angels are looking down in heaven, and so they're exuding the joy of heaven, and these Greek people are supposed to be human, the vanguard of human-like art, so.
I wonder. I don't know. I'm just, if I didn't find a date associated with this particular one, but you figure that something that's carved on the cathedral in Reims is, 10,000, whatever, 1100 or 1200 or whenever that cathedral was built, CE, and this was carved in 1500 years earlier, whether there was this evolution in graphic arts or these kinds of concrete arts. So why do you think he suggested keeping that smile secret?
The archaic smile?
No, you're talking about your angelic smile.
Oh, yeah.
Would you share your smile or not?
Well, I don't know that this is answering that, but it occurred to me, I was talking to someone this week who's gone through a really tough year. And she said to me, I found myself smiling today, and I don't remember the last time that happened. And she was by herself. That was what do they call it? That was her inner smile coming out. And she recognized something shifted. Because I haven't smiled, other than, hello, Belle, I gotta put a smile on my face, for a long time. And I think, to some extent, that might be this. What he's talking about. I don't know about the angel thing. I don't know about that, but that angelic smile, that smile that comes out without you seeking it.
The other thing is it's not there to
she was alone. She said, I was leaving my house and I found myself smiling.
The smiles of people are a way of communicating and therefore can be manipulated.
Yeah, a lot of times you're walking someplace and somebody will smile at you, and it's just a way of saying good morning without using words. Yeah.
I had a colleague, he was the Baptist chaplain at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. He was Southern Baptist, but he was the old school Southern Baptist, the Jimmy Carter Southern Baptist. But he would, every time he would walk across campus, no matter who he saw, he would greet everybody with a smile. And he told me that, you know, he enjoyed doing that because he really enjoyed seeing the response that generated from somebody that he didn't know. You know, it was just good morning and good morning, and you know, shake them out of whatever they might have been in. You know, so.
If somebody smiles at you, it's pretty hard not to smile back.
Right.
If somebody smiles at you, it's pretty hard not to smile back.
Yeah.
Just generally.
Yeah. So let's shift to the. I think clearly this is working now, so maybe we'll get better sound. Sorry about that.
I want to review the way we are approaching these gentle practices. I taught at the beginning that there are three things that we are using to establish these gentle practices: words, shifts, and repetition. So we're paying particular attention to different words. So later I'm going to be talking about the words beauty and gratitude. And we're shifting our behavior during the day in just small, subtle ways. And I'm inviting you to imagine that these shifts are like the shift that a chiropractor would have you do with your body to have better posture. What we're looking for is better posture for our souls. And the smile is one way to have better posture, just through a little bit of a shift. And then the third is repetition. That a lot of our days are like Groundhog Day, like that movie Groundhog Day. We prepare the same breakfast. We drive the same routes. We go up the same stairs to go to the office and see our colleagues, and so on. And we're paying attention to what happens in those repetitious actions that we're making little shifts, often by remembering certain words. So now we're talking about this secret angelic smile. I want to talk a little bit about the uses of it, focusing on the words beauty and gratitude. Your angelic smile is a reminder that life is beautiful, and I mean that with a capital B. Now, I must say, when I first started sharing this teaching, I got some pushback, particularly from a bishop who took me aside and said, you know what? We are so caught up in America in this kind of cult of lifestyle that if you use the word beauty, you really have to be careful because people are going to associate it with a beautiful car or a beautiful handbag. But that's not what beauty with a capital B is. Beauty with a capital B is beauty as such, the highest kind of beauty. Think of the beauty of a wonderful liturgy. That's not just happy clappy stuff. That also brings in human joy, as well as human joy, human grief, human sorrow, all the rich experience of what beauty can mean in a worship context. Let me give you an example. One of the first weeks of pandemic, I decided to do the full Eucharistic prayer. And I went up there and I did the full Eucharistic prayer, and then I ate alone the bread and the wine. And then the choir went into an anthem, and I went off to the side of the altar and I sat down in a chair and I wept. I wept for sorrow and longing, because that sacrament was meant to be shared with the people that I love together as a symbol of how we are bound to one another. And here I was, and I couldn't share it. That was a sorrowful moment, but it was a loving moment. And it was beautiful in the way that I want you to imagine beauty is. In a way, it could even invoke your secret angelic smile to think of something, a moment like that grief, of that beauty, of that liturgy, of that moment. Now, properly speaking, beauty of the kind that I'm talking about here evokes gratitude, gratitude for the world that we have been given. And an attitude of gratitude isn't enough when we're talking about beauty with a capital B. We are not only to have an attitude of gratitude, but to actually be gratitude, one who is so deeply thankful that it takes over the core of our being. If we begin to experience that, what we're actually experiencing is adoration, the kind of adoration and praise that the saints and the angels eternally give towards God. So truly, if we understand and embrace beauty with a capital B and translate that into a gratitude that is so deep it's like adoration, the smile that we smile is truly, in that instance, angelic. So I'm inviting you to say yes to this invitation from God to realize the beauty that is all around us. It's an act of faith. And I'm going to quote again our friend Coleridge about Christianity. He's quoting about Christianity, but it could also be applied to beauty. He writes, "I should expect to hear a troubled murmur. How can I comprehend this? How is this to be proved? To the first question I should answer, Christianity is not a theory or a speculation, but a life. Not a philosophy of life, but a life and a living process. To the second, try it."
So what do you think about sorrow? Or first, what do you think about beauty in the way that he's described it? Does that ring true to you in one way or another? No?
There's in the movie Zorba the Greek, there's a scene where the madam, this takes place just after the war in Crete, the traditions of the Greek and the rules. The madam dies, who was Zorba's lover. And while he's holding her while she's dying, the local natives get excited because Greek law says if you're not a Greek native, when you die, that property goes to anybody that can get it. And while she's dying, there's about 50 people that heard she was dying, come running out to her place, and are stripping curtains and taking her clothes because she's not a Greek. And Zorba holds her, and she dies. And he goes out into the courtyard, and it shows people grabbing chickens and taking goats and just stripping the place. And while he's standing there, a man comes up and gives him a glass of wine. And the two of them have wine to drink to her death. And the man that gives Zorba the wine in a previous scene had held him back when he was trying to protect a widow that gets killed. And so here's the man that stopped Zorba from saving the widow's life, honoring this madam that had died. And I thought, isn't that amazing that Zorba in that instance could see the beauty of honoring her, transcending a man that had allowed the widow to die. True Christianity, the beauty, and the both of them drank to her death and smiled for her honor of what she was. That's Christ. That's the beauty of what happened in that scene. It's always stuck with me. True forgiveness for a man that prevented you from saving a woman that died.
So what in you, what evokes that sense of appreciation or awareness of beauty?
does that or what ought to do that? Is there a way to provoke it?
You know, yesterday morning, the men's group had a presentation on Haiti. And that country right now is run by 7 or 8 gangs, and the average income per person is $2,100 a year. And I thought about it at the end of it, you know, how lucky we are, how beautiful this country is, and how much gratitude I have for what we have when you hear something like that.
Other thoughts on beauty? Have you, and you're talking there just a little bit about kind of the dark side that brings out the light. And you know, he was talking about sorrow. Are there experiences that you've had or other kinds of encounters that have evoked beauty that you wouldn't say, look at that flower, you know, or something, or listen to that lovely piece of music and say that's really beautiful, but is there something that we wouldn't expect? You know, to hear him talk about sorrow as being beautiful. Are there other kinds of things that you've experienced?
What's coming to mind for me is I was in the Caribbean, and there was, I needed to get a new watch battery, and I was told to go to this shop that was on so-and-so street. Well, there were no street signs. And I just looked at people and I thought, gosh, who out of all these people could help me? And I found a woman who was older. She was probably not as old as me, but, and I'm thinking about how this particular town, it all runs together for me right now, but she didn't have a lot, but she walked me to the shop, which had moved, and then she asked people where to find the shop, and she stayed with me at the shop when we finally found it. And I'm reflecting on the beauty of her person to help a stranger in the midst of, I mean, the town reminded me of Africa. And so in the midst of this aesthetic ugliness, there was beauty in the human soul. And so it just wasn't all ugly, because she had a beautiful soul.
What struck me with what you were saying, and also what he was saying about the grief, was I think the beauty is when we experience something that's real, rather than all the facades that we usually carry around and project. I think that's when we see real beauty is when situations are real, where people are being real. You know, he could have sucked it up and went and cried in the sacristy, but he didn't. You know, he was there and real in front of whoever was there. She could have just ignored you, but she was real, and she stopped what she was doing, and stayed with you until you were where you needed, you know, got what you got.
Yeah.
So I think it's a little bit like the Velveteen Rabbit, you know? It's like when you're real, that's when you're real. And I think that's
That's the beauty, even though he was shabby.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or times of stress. I mean, we've all reflected on things that happened during the height of COVID time, and how grateful we remember. I mean, when I first got my vaccine, I cried in this pool with all the other people getting their vaccine. I'm so grateful for science and, you know, the ability, being an American, being able to get a vaccine right away, being older so I could qualify. You know, I mean, you wouldn't necessarily give gratitude for being an older person. person, but, you know, I mean, that was part of it. So I don't think any of us have to travel too far back in time to remember that time of immense stress and unknown, and how grateful we were for first responders, and just everything. For information, for news, you know, the 6 p.m. news, how happy we were to just get a little bit of information how this was affecting us. So.
Let's go to the next place. He's going to move a little bit here from kind of the smile side of beauty into sort of the deeper thing, I think.
Next gentle practice is a more advanced gentle practice, and it is to get into the practice of using our wounds to grow and deepen in love. The key word this time is send. You may remember that send is right at the beginning of our daily prayer. "O God, send me this day to do the work you have given me to do, to love and serve you with gladness and singleness of heart." We are sent. And we are sent, I want to suggest, with our wounds. Part of where that word send comes from is the story of the resurrected Jesus appearing to the disciples in the Gospel of John. You may remember that he shows up with his wounds and says to them, "As the Father has sent me, so I send you." He also says, "Peace be with you," and then he also breathes on them. But he sends them. He's wounded as he sends them. What I want to suggest is that just as Jesus was wounded as he showed up to send his disciples, so he sends us as his disciples, as people who are wounded. This shows up also in one of the 7 vows of discipleship groups. Those are the Christian support groups that I'm encouraging you to try. Now, one of the vows is, "By God's grace, I will do the work God sends me to do this week. Remembering Jesus says, 'As the Father has sent me, so I send you,' entrusting my discipleship group to test and support that work." We are sent with our wounds, and I want to suggest that our wounds have a certain kind of wisdom to them. Let me give you an example. When I was beginning to work on this gentle practice, I placed the wound on my side like this. That's how I imagined it. I received an email that followed pretty exactly something that I sometimes preach about, which is using the compliment sandwich. A compliment sandwich is something that I actually learned from my son's preschool teachers, who said that if you want to offer a correction to somebody, it was helpful to offer a compliment at the beginning, the kind of correction in the middle, and then conclude also with a compliment. Well, I got an email from a parishioner who I love and who I know loves me. There was a compliment sandwich about my preaching. "Christopher, you've always been such a good preacher that's meant so much to us." And then he went on to say, "But your sermons these first few weeks of pandemic have been too heady for me. We're hurting right now, and I need to hear more about that. Christopher, we know you have it in you, and we believe in you." Well, my head knew that this was a kind email. My wife read it, and she thought it was very kind too. But it went right to my gut, where I felt defensive and like, "No, that's not what, he wasn't listening very well, blah, 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 blah." It took me 48 hours to finally write a response that started to feel like it was coming from my heart. But even then, I had my wife read it, and she said, "Honey, that email reads like it was written with clenched teeth." And I said, "That's because it was." So I had to wait yet another 24 hours to allow my response to go from my head and my gut to my heart, where I realized it really was a loving gesture. And I found a funny little analogy with the life of Jesus, thought of that, and responded with the sense of humor and generosity. And sure enough, over the next few weeks, as I made the shift that he suggested, He sent all sorts of supportive emails and it ended up well. But I was using my wound. I was paying attention to how I was hurt until I was ready to respond in a way that was centered on love. What I'm suggesting in this gentle practice is to keep your wound open. Sometimes it makes sense. Kierkegaard wrote in his diary, keeping open a wound can indeed also be healthy. A healthy and open wound at times, it is better than when it closes. So that's what we're experiencing. Right? And in fact, that's true. I told my friend Teresa about this, and she said, you know, I had surgery on my forehead on some cancerous cells, and the surgeon left it open. And I asked the surgeon why. And he said, because if I closed it up, you would, for the rest of your life, look perpetually curious with an eyebrow raised. Sometimes it's just better to leave an open wound. But we need to be careful. This isn't self-abuse. It's just keeping ourselves vulnerable in the way that Jesus is vulnerable and came to us, even resurrected, as one who was vulnerable. Here it's really important to have that steady prayer life, to be part of a loving church, and even better to join one of these discipleship groups where you have people who are there to support you and listen to you as you go out into the world with your loving wounds.
So what kind of wounds do you think he's talking about?
It was fascinating. Yesterday morning at men's group, we're sitting at this table and there's 5 guys there. And somehow we got into the discussion about being let go or being fired from your job. And for a guy who was supposed to be the breadwinner, take care of his family and everything, each of us were wounded when that happened. And it was funny because none of us had really ever wanted to talk about it. We kept that all inside of us where, you know, he had been let go or he got fired. And it turned out every person sitting there had been fired and remembered exactly how it happened and when it happened. And it was almost like a healing service because several of the guys were letting go of that. You know, it happened 20, 30 years ago, but they were still wounded.
Well, I think the wound, whether it's grief or being fired or whatever, gets past all of our shields and gets right down to, you know, our essence. And from there, because that is open and they're there, I think that's when we get into also the depth of the beauty that he's talking about. We have access to it, whereas many of our days, it's so healed up, if you will, or over being healed, that that we don't have access to it, or we don't access it.
How do we use those? There was a book that was, Mary will remember this too, or maybe some of the rest of you have read it, a book by Henri Nouwen that came out 40, 50 years ago called The Wounded Healer. And I, you know, when I saw that in the material that he was going to be talking about, that was exactly where my mind went, but he takes this in a different direction, I think. And so I'm curious as to how do we use, how do we bring our wounds?
Well, if we're still dripping blood, I don't think we can be helpful to others. So there's a balance. There's got to be a balance where you come to a point where you're not still in the middle of your heated, hot anger or you're crying all day long, that you have to move a little bit to be able to
include
help
something
others.
besides yourself.
Because when you're really hurting, you're like a dog who is just, all they want to do is lick their wounds, and they're not very nice.
It's like he was saying, he needed to sleep on that for several days before he could write an email that wasn't toxic.
think there are growth times. I mean, maybe they don't seem like growth times at the time, but when you look back on them, you realize they are kind of growth periods in your life where you figure out how to get over the wounds and how you move forward.
So then you're wounded, how do you move to the other person?
Sometimes I think that helps you recognize the woundedness in others and to have empathy, whereas if you haven't been wounded, you're perfect, and that's not going to really help anybody else.
I find it, I learned a long time ago that if there's somebody who's wounded in a way that I've never been wounded, and I say, I understand, that's absolutely wrong.
Yeah.
Because that's not my wound. And I found that in those kinds of situations, and I had this a lot when I was at DU, where there were parents who would come because their kids had died for whatever reason. I've never had that experience. So I had to tell them, I honestly cannot understand, I cannot imagine what you're going through. But I know that if I've been in some other situation that was extreme, what I would want in that situation was not necessarily to be told, well, I understand what you're going through, there. But more, I can't understand, I just can't imagine that I'm here. Because I think as a wounded person, you want somebody to accompany you in that pain. And maybe you learn that from your wound, whatever it's been. Whether it's being fired, or it's losing a child, or whatever.
Well, I've been fired and I lost a child. I think, when you lose a child, you just think about all the great memories that you had with that person. I know when I'm working at my desk, I have a picture there of my son and I when we went skiing by ourselves, and we're standing on top of a mountain. And when I look at that, I just think about him. And it's hard to get over being wounded that. But I will say, once you've gone through losing a child, you can understand what other people are going through.
But you've got now I haven't lost a child, but so you have some distance, so you're not going to fall into despair when the memory comes up again, or to be able to help somebody else. I don't know.
I think we all react to that kind of a situation very differently, because I'm sure there's pain and sorrow inside myself someplace, but I haven't really been able to experience it yet. I don't know. Am I a cold fish? Well, not really, because I cared about him. But the real grief that you see women on TV going,
of a certain
I can't do that.
culture.
Sorry. Yeah, exactly.
Certain culture.
My culture, my raising up is you just keep your mouth shut and do your own business. And so that might be a handicap for me, because I haven't been allowed to do that quietly in a room someplace or where.
Well, in our situation, it's very unique, because if he had stayed in Vietnam where he was born, he wouldn't have lived to be a teenager. And so all we can think about is the 50 great years we had with him and that he had. And I think when you think it that way, you can get to the joy.
He was a joy. I mean, he was a gift from God.
I'm going to skip section 4. I'll let you look at that. I want to get to section 5 first.
So the last thing to know about this practice of using your wound is that Jesus sends us wounded to be wounded. There are many great saints who were clearly wounded. Perhaps the most famous example is St. Francis, who, towards the end of his life, prayed to share the exact same wounds as Jesus, and he received the stigmata, the same wounds that Jesus did on the cross. One of the followers of St. Francis in the 20th century was a man named Padre Pio in Italy, and he too received these same wounds. And he was a very simple man, not a theologian, and his most popular phrase, and he just said it all the time, was pray, hope, and don't worry. And he has become the patron saint of stress relief and the winter blues in Italy. And supposedly he is the most popular saint in Italy to pray to because he's a stress reliever. By his wounds, people are healed of their stress, who he is. And it goes back even further. Mary, at the beginning, when she is told that she will be bearing the Savior, as she's pregnant with him, Simeon says to her, "This child is destined for the falling and rising of many in Israel, and to be a sign that will be opposed, so that the inner thoughts of many will be revealed. And a sword will pierce your own soul too." She is wounded, and she will be wounded. Paul, we know, also shared a wound, and he asked to be rid of it multiple times, and he heard God say to him, "My grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness." It is in and through these wounds that God chooses to bring God's healing to the world. So I imagine, this is an intensely kinesthetic practice. I imagine that I have a wound in my side and that I carry it with me all the time. It is like the wound that I have in my body. When I was 8 years old, my finger, the tip of my right finger, middle finger, was severed in an accident on the beach. And I was carried off to the ER. It was hanging on by a little flap of skin, and they sewed it back on. But it hasn't grown since then. I don't know if you can see this here, but this finger is shorter than this one, and it's a little off. And I'm often aware of it, like when it gets cold, it's the first thing to become numb. I sometimes hit it against things and it hurts in a different way than other fingers. I just carry it with me all the time. As I've taken on this gentle practice, the same thing has become true, emotionally and spiritually. I just have this wound here that I carry with me all the time, and that I trust is a source of wisdom and healing and love. But here's the thing, we need to be very careful about this wound. Part of the reason that I imagine it on the side is that I can protect it, by just having my arms folded like this. You see, you can't hit me again there if I'm like this. And also, this welcomes us to do a physical gesture called havening. You may know that if you breathe slowly, that's kind of a stress reliever. Well, the same thing is true of havening. If you stroke yourself like this, it's like giving yourself a hug, and literally it de-stresses you. So if we're going to imagine that we have a wound in our side, it's also good to remember that we can protect the wound and that we can soothe ourselves sometimes, because it hurts to be hurt. And sometimes it's hard to know that that hurt is actually an invitation from God to grow in love, but not to the point of our self-harm in an awful way. It's just part of the truth of who we are. We are wounded, and God sends us as we are out into the world. This is a path to grow in love as Christ loves us. A beautiful example of using your wounds is the marriage of two of the people who were the leaders of my 20s, 30s group when I was serving a church in Los Angeles. Our 20s, 30s group met every Tuesday night, TNT, Tuesday nights together. And we always concluded by saying Compline. And a couple, Karen and Brian, loved saying Compline. And they particularly loved a prayer by St. Augustine, which I will read in one moment. A couple in the parish offered to have the organist at All Saints Beverly Hills, the name of the parish, Craig Phillips, write a piece of music, a setting of this prayer. And they chose to do that. Here's the prayer. Keep watch, dear Lord, with those who work or watch or weep this night, and give your angels charge over those who sleep. Tend the sick, Lord Christ. Give rest to the weary. Bless the dying. Soothe the suffering. Pity the afflicted. Shield the joyous. And all for your love's sake. Karen and Brian chose that prayer because even in the midst of their moment of greatest joy, they wanted us all to remember that at that very moment there were people who were suffering. And I have to tell you that it was one of the most joyful occasions of my entire life, doing that wedding. It was filled with joy, and as we sang those words, it only expanded and deepened our sense of joy, love, and gratitude, using our wounds to walk with Christ.
So, does that resonate with you? That idea of having a wound in your side like Christ? Why? Or why not?
My grandmother came over from Sicily and lived about 7 miles from her husband-to-be, but met in Pennsylvania. And we always asked, why did you marry him? Because he was a very abusive man. And she said, well, I like the way he parted his hair. She was 27 in the 20s. And when you're 27, you're a widow forever. The mother would cry every day, why aren't you married? Where are my grandchildren? And give her a tough time. So she married this man. And it was a very tumultuous marriage. And he was very abusive. They had 9 kids. She was Benedictine trained, and so every morning she prayed for the day. Every night she thanked God for what was given to her during the day. And that her whole life. But she didn't have her citizenship papers, so he could hold that over her. And he said, if you don't do what I say or tolerate who I am, I will send you back. When her youngest daughter was 9 and Sam was the next one, who was 11, she went to get her citizenship papers. At that time, this was during World War II. And the judge looked at her, and 4 of her children were in the military. 1 had died already. She couldn't speak English. There's no way she was going to pass the test. And the judge looked at the paper of what she had and what her children were doing, and he said, Mrs. Marthia, you are more of a citizen than I will ever be. Citizenship granted, gave it to her without even taking the test. So here was a woman that had this wound that was with her whole life. Wondering when she was going back to Sicily. And somehow was able to transcend it. And I truly believe because of her faith and her Christian practice of praying, she carried her through this time. And from then on, her life was much safer. That wound was with her all those years.
How do we use our wounds with regard to others? What does our woundedness have to do with how we deal with others, I think? He brought up at the beginning, I think, of that section about, maybe it was the previous section, about being sent. We are sent with our wounds. We are not sent with our wounds sitting on the top of our dresser when we walk out of the house. They go with us. What does that mean, to be sent as a wounded person as we engage the world?
I think it's, I interpret it as experiences, and acknowledging how you feel and a decision you make. Okay, this happened. This is how I feel. This is what I'm going to do. And then when you meet someone who's even more wounded than you perceive yourself to be, you make a decision. I'm gonna be here and I'm just gonna listen and see what they need from me. Maybe I can offer them something from my own experiences and my own woundedness. And I think that's how God uses it.
Well, I'll tell you what carried me through when my son died and also when Bev almost passed away is, I've always said that this church is my family. And I'll bet you I got 50 or 60 emails at that time from people in this church who lifted me up. And so, yeah, I was wounded, but I was surrounded by a family.
Yeah, I was going to say comfort. I mean, that Compline prayer just really was a flashback for me to, again, COVID time, because a group of us did online Compline. And that prayer took on a totally different meaning during that time when we were talking about soothe the suffering. So I think that, and I would go so far as to say that the vulnerability we were living in was our Christ wound at that time. And we really brought comfort to ourselves and to church members who joined us online for Compline. And I think it was at that time definitely bringing comfort to people, just like Jim's church family, Deb's church family brought comfort, offered comfort at that time.
Your comment, and we're going to put here, just thinking about that time of COVID and how wounded we all were. And how many people wanted to deny the fact that we're living in this time. No, we're just going to keep doing stuff like something will happen. We're not going to mask. We're not going to do all this stuff. We're not just the denial of the fact that the wound could be there. I hadn't thought about that in that way until you said that. But yeah, there were those who said, I'm not going to deal with being either I'm too strong, or it's not existing, or I don't want to have to deal with it. So I think his suggestion, implicit, is as you pray that prayer to be sent out to do the work you have given us to do, that work that we are sent out with is to carry that wound that we have, or those wounds that we have as we encounter others. Maybe that becomes a kind of a salve or help healing for those others as we encounter them, not from a position of superiority or supreme health or something.
You've made something clear for me. So if we're going to deny our wounds and just build a wall, we're not going to be able to be open to others' hurting. But when we're vulnerable to our own wounds, then we can be.
I think that's right. Yeah.
That makes it clear why the benefit of bringing your wounds to a situation as opposed to locking them up. Could be better. Well, what people do. Yeah, that makes it clear.
Well, thank you all. We'll be back next week with Nadine to close us out.
The other piece too that just occurred to me when